Okay, good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Mocha's application team doing our design shop talk today. We've got a handful of questions that were sent in ahead of time, so I'm going to start with those. If you have questions while we're live, please type them in the chat. I've got another monitor set up over here. I'll keep an eye on it to see what questions come in, but type them in the chat and we'll address them live as long as we can. Don't forget, we do have a form online that you can type in questions at any point, and whenever we have these talks, I pull from there and your questions will be waiting. So and we'll have them on the next talk ready to go. All right, so I'm going to start off with the ones that were pre-submitted, and like I said, if you have questions, just type them in. Let me check and make sure both YouTube and Facebook are up. It appears they both are. Excellent. And it looks like my sound is working, so I'm going to get going. All right. So how do you add details to an eagle wing to look like feathers? Okay, so with this, you've got lots of options, and a lot of it depends on the look you're trying to get and what size the element is, right? So I've got a bunch of little examples here for you to see, but like for instance, you can digitize each one of these elements as right here, a column, right? So it's really just about looking at the eagle that you want and what you're trying to create and building it out, right? So I can use these column stitches and create feathers, right? Not like that, but you know, so I can create individual feathers and build it up from the back to the front to look like that. You can also do things depending on the size where I'm just gonna rough it in to give you an idea, right? So I can do a fill, right? That doesn't really look like feathers, but I can come into here and play with the random and even the stitch direction and things like that to give it a little more texture. And that works really well if it's small and then you're going to do outlines around it. It'll give it kind of, and that works for the small feathers. You can get that and then build in these over and around it. You know, so for example, over here, like you've got this fill and then you put these around it. So you've got the satin stitch around, you've got this fill, and then the border is kind of defining the actual shape of the feathers, right? So if you want the satin stitches, you kind of build them out using your column stitches and things like that. Now, when it gets even larger, it's now a matter of layering, right? So you can see on this guy here, it's literally looking at each of the different areas and filling it in with different colors and whatnot to build that out. Changing the stitch directions, so even making the fills messy. You can even come through and to give it more dynamic texture to it, use running stitches and scribble, right? Make the stitch count wide, and that can add highlights along there and give it a more realistic feel to it being, you know, a fluffy feather rather than just a flat fill, right? So all of those are artistic decisions that you kind of have to look at and make a decision on how you want to do. Whether you're doing them as fills and you stack them, changing your stitch directions, your densities, layer the colors up. When you're layering colors, you don't want it bulletproof, right? So you got to start thinking about how you stack those up density wise so that you don't end up with 10,000 stitches all trying to sew on a small area. So there's a lot of considerations to consider, but you know, it really boils down to what look are you going for, right? So do you want it super realistic like this guy over here? Do you want it to be outlined so then it's fills with outlines on it? Do you want to build out each feather individually? Or even like with these back feathers, do a fill, and then rather than doing each individual feather here, it's a fill with some outlines on it. And then that allows more focus on the actual wings over here, right? So all of these are simply columns, you know, a column 1 or a column 2. And you just, if you have art, you just kind of trace around to build out those feathers, have them overlap just a little bit, and go from the back to the front so it looks realistic, you know, with the final wings and whatnot, you know, the bones or the top part on top of it all to kind of give it that shape. Does that help any? So how do you make it look like feathers? There you go. So You use Adobe Creative Cloud to get fonts. Yeah, their fonts are really nice, but they have them locked down in a really weird manner, which is what you're describing here. What you do is exactly how I do it. The Adobe fonts, for some reason, they are not stored in the Windows font folders, and they have this. It probably makes a lot of sense if I understood it of what they're trying to do. I assume they're just protecting their IP and their stuff, and they want to limit how it's used. So they have it controlled, so it's only accessible to a certain number of things. Predominantly, their softwares and specific softwares. So the only way I know to use it is to use it in Illustrator, save it as an EPS, and then manually punch it. So that's how I do it as well. And every time I try to find the font files that they use, they seem to be kind of protected in a manner where I can't even copy them out to use them, which again, I understand they're protecting their IP, right? They have, licensing requirements. You have to have their Creative Cloud and all that stuff. So I get it. But it's not something that's accessible for us to be able to access the actual OTF and TTF files. So what you're doing is how it's done, as far as I know anyway. A related question: if I'm creating something, a word, a shape, whatever, that's really thin, is single line center the best choice for this? No. A 5-point stitch is smaller than it's just a little bit bigger than your needle, right? Your needle's what, 3 points, 3 to 3.5 points in diameter. So you're basically going to be stabbing nearly the same spot every time the needle goes to take a stitch. So when you are going that small, you have a few options. I would go with a bean stitch or a chain stitch. So let's go look at those. So a bean stitch would be this guy. So it's just a running stitch. And how this runs is based on the thickness here. It's going to go 1, 2, 3. So bean stitches of 3. It stitches 3 times. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, all the way over. You can also make this a decorative, right? So if I said, all right, instead of a bean, make it decorative, and instead of that, let's make it one of these thin chains. Well, then I can go into the properties of that and make it thinner, right? So it's thicker than a bean stitch, thinner than a satin stitch. Like normally my personal limit on satin stitches is no smaller than about 12 points. Now, if you absolutely have to have it a satin stitch for whatever reason, then you got to do things where you're actually changing the angle of the stitch to make the stitches longer, right? I'm overdue. Whoa, this is a really not a good example right here that I just drew, but it kind of gets the point, right? So what you would do is heavily angle the stitches so that they're longer, but the overall width is narrow, right? So this is really wide at the moment. And then you would have to go and change your density to be larger. So essentially you would make this really skinny, but really angled so that the stitches are long. And then your densities would go higher, right? So instead of use auto, you might use something like 6. So it's more like a stem stitch. And the individual stitches are longer. So it can, you're not stabbing it in the same place over and over again, and it will look thicker while still being really thin. So that's another technique you can use. But when you do things like that, you've got to make your density larger. Otherwise, you end up with an excessive amount of stitches in the same spot, and it doesn't sew well, right? But just looking at this, how long did I make these? So those stitches are 45 points long, but the column itself is only 5 points wide, right? So it'll sew because the stitches are longer and it's not trying to stab, 5 points when your needle's 3 points wide in the same hole over and over and over again. Okay, so that's another technique you can use if you really want to go that route. But personally, I tend to go with a chain stitch or the bean stitch, and that's how I do them personally. Okay, so hopefully that helped. So that's that. When doing applique letters, how can I set it up to do all the placement stitches at one time instead of doing each individually? For reference, I use the lettering type on the object property box and change it to an applique. Cool. All right, so let's do it. So I'm going to make a new file. And I'm going to say Siam. I'm going to make it 3 inches tall, because why not? Because I want it to be an applique anyway. Let's make that a font. That. There. And then I'm going to go into the properties, and I'm going to tell that to be an applique. Apply. Cool. I can go into the applique settings here, and I can say I want an additional color change just because that's my personal preference. And maybe in the applique settings, I don't like this either, so I prefer like a 60-40 split. That's 100% me thing. That has just my personal preferences. Okay, so this is currently doing it placement, tack down, satin, placement, tack down, satin, placement, tack down, satin. What you're asking is, how do I make all those placement stitches as one? Okay, so once you have your applique, how you want it to look, and you're done. Let's say this file is good to go. I just don't like the order that it's going in. I want to be able to do all my placements as one. So from now, I would go operations, convert to wireframe. Right? And of course, I did not do that. Operations, convert to wireframe. There we go. Operations, convert to wireframe. Operations, convert to wireframe. All right, so what did that just do? That made it where I can now take all of these elements and group them together. So I can say, right there are my 3 placement stitches. I can make them all go together into one stitch, right? So that now they sew all those placements, then I sew the tack down, and then the satin stitch, the tack down, the satin stitch, the tack down, the satin stitch, right? Or maybe I want to do placement and copy paste that, give it another color, because maybe I want to be able to, you know, mark the fabric of where I'm going to lay my fabric and then sew the fabric down. So you have a little more flexibility on it when they're separated, and you can rearrange them to however you want, right? What makes sense for your project. Keep in mind, it's typically better to finish as you go, meaning how the original font was. Placement, tack down, satin stitch, next letter. Placement, tack down, satin stitch, next letter. That's typically the best way to do it to avoid registration issues. Now, does that mean that's the only way to do it? No. Depending on the size of the element, it's perfectly fine to do all your placements and then all the tack downs and then all your satin stitches all in one. But it really just depends on your particular application and what you're doing and what makes sense for your particular project. Okay? Does that help any? Hopefully it does. All right, so that's how I would do it. Woo! How can I get an outline when doing the rope effect like shown in this picture here? All right, so the rope effect is really fun, but punching outlines that is done manually for the most part. So if I can go normal decorative rope. There's these rope ones down here somewhere. Yeah, and I can say circle there. So I can create a really quick, pretty rope, right? So from here now, if I want to outline all that, I need to do that by hand and trace out the shape. Typically, I'm one who will do it once and then go through and create a decorative. So I don't have an example of it, but typically how I've done these in the past is I will actually just go trace it out how I want it and then start copying and pasting it around, or creating my own outline decorative where I think about it ahead of time of how I want it to look to outline each shape, and I'll create that as a decorative, paying attention to the starts and stops to make sure it's cohesive and overlap. You know, it doesn't end up with a bunch of lines overlapping that don't make sense. But typically speaking, when you're doing this sort of thing, it becomes a manual punching process where you go through and you decide how you want it to go and you run around doing it, right? So, I mean, I could. All right, I'm only going to go a little bit, so I could choose to do it this way, right? Okay, and that should have been a normal. Right, so I could just run around each of those elements with a bean stitch or a running normal stitch, change my stitch lengths to whatever I need it to be to make it make sense, and I can trace them out that way. So honestly, that's how I've always done it, is just manually punched it. But every now and then, if I know something's going to be repeating and I'm going to do it a lot of the times, I'll take the time to make a decorative, because decoratives are so convenient. You draw one shape and then you're done. Okay. But that's how I would do that, is go through and trace your elements out for how they make sense. Now with the rope pattern, they have multiple ones that you could use. One is wider, right? So you can play with the settings, and maybe this one makes more sense for you. You know, things like that. All right. Let's see, what else do we have question-wise? In DesignShop 12, the design checker has a message, stitch points over 127 points. I understand what that means, but how do I find the culprit and fix it? So when you go to the design checker, where is it? All right, so over here, if I click on that, notice that propeller right there. Sorry, not that propeller, this one right here. Right there, it shows me where my issue is, where that propeller is, right? So anytime the design checker gives you something over here, if you click on it, this propeller here will show up at the location that you have an issue, right? So whatever it might be, that's where you go. So if I'm over here, let's see what shows up, right? So in this design, I've got a bunch. So if I look at it, where is it? So it's on that element right where that propeller is. Right where that propeller is. So all of these, it's this element because that's an underlay issue. Okay, so this one, needle penetration, right there where that guy is. So too many stitches in that area. Okay, so that's how you find them. Like you click on these, you look for the propeller. If it's no underlay, it's just going to show you the element. If it's a specific stitch, like this one, needle penetration density in that area, it's going to give you that propeller right there showing you where the issue is. Okay, so that's what you would look for. And then you can zoom in on it, see where the, you know, all right, I've got a whole bunch of points on top of each other, so you can decide whether you are okay with that or if it really needs to be corrected, those sorts of things. So for yours, long stitches, those need to be fixed, but that's how you'd find them. All right. All right. When I step in repeat a design in DesignShop 12 that starts and ends with the same color OS, does not seem to recognize the two entries in color. It lumps them together, throwing off the sequence for the next repeat. Okay, so a few things with that. First off, make sure you're using current software. I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was a bug, but it's long been fixed. So if you're using really old software, it might be a bug. So make sure you're using current software. But what I would suspect is the more likely issue is going to be associated with this button right here, auto merge color blocks. When that's turned on, it's going to actually force it to, it's going to consider all, like if you have black stacked, right? It's going to say all of that's one color, even though you have different designs, right? So when it goes to OS, it goes, all right, all the blacks right there, that's one color, then it's going to go to white, then red, whatever it is. So you would want to turn that off and make sure you have individual colors. Oh, I just turned it on and messed up my stuff. That's cool. But I can come over here and say, all right, that's one, this is another, right? So I can separate it all, and now it will behave as separate color changes. Okay, so that would be my suspect, is the color, the auto merge color blocks is on, so it's combining those colors for you. That would be my suspicion. Without looking at your exact file, I wouldn't be able to tell you for sure, but if I had to guess, that's what's going on there, is the merge color blocks. Hey, see that right there? That's the decorative chain stitch. That would be great for that. Right there is that decorative chain. Anyway. All right, so those were the questions that were sent in ahead of time. Did anyone have questions while we're live? It's been a quiet group this morning. So don't forget, we do have the form out here. When you go and look at it, DesignShop questions here, or you can type in that link, whatever you want. But right there, that will take you to a form where you can submit your questions. That way, they don't get lost or forgotten for next time. If you ever have a question when these aren't live, just type them in, and next time I go to pull questions, it'll be there. All right. So anything else before we call it a day? I'll kind of hang for a second in case anyone's typing frantically. That way I don't accidentally hang up on you. Spring break for us around here, so starting next week, all the kids are home for the week, so yay. They're going to want to spend the time at the beach, but it's so cold right now, I can't even think about the beach. But I'm always cold. I live in Florida, which is ridiculous. All right, everyone. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. And if you have questions, please submit them, and we'll address them on the next one. Hope to be back next week. And let us know what you want to learn about, and we'll try to get it incorporated. Oh, how do you fix the error from the design checker? Were you on when I was talking about that? Or, so to find first, all right, I went over it, but let's do it again. So when you go to the design checker, you would go and find the element that is offensive, right? So this element, and you'd look at it and say, all right, what is my, for this particular element that's already selected, it said there's no underlay. So I can come over here and say its issue is underlay, so I can add it. And now that element is no longer on my list, right? So if down here, I don't have 127.1, which was the original question, but if I had a long stitch, I would click on this thing and find out where is it, right? So that propeller shows me where it is. I would zoom in on it and go, all right, this one is needle density, and I can see in this area there's a bunch of stitches on top of one another. So I either decide that's okay, or I move points around to fix it, right? So if I look at this just by moving around, you'll see I've got a gazillion points coming into one spot. I can look at that and say, 2, 4, 6, 8, is that okay? Maybe, maybe not. If I don't like it, I can spread them out so that now it's going to reduce that density. And it still look relatively okay. Still look like it from afar without the density of stitches there. So really all of this is just things to assess and decide whether it's going to affect your design or not. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to change it. Like some of these you may not want underlay because you did a global underlay first. Others you might go, oh yeah, I need to fix that. No underlay, or really long stitches. I don't want really long stitches. So you would go in and adjust the element to change that. Okay, so Michael, did that help? But like if you had that really long stitch, you'd find the element that was offensive. So if it was this one, you'd go into the properties of it and say, all right, let's change the stitch length right here and force it to not allow those stitch lengths to go over 120. So in this case, no bigger than 60, or sorry, no bigger than 40. Yeah, excellent. So hopefully that helps. But the design checker is great. It shows you where the issue is. You just got to, this is how I do it. I click on it, find the propeller right there. So that is where the issue is, right? And then I go, all right, so my problem is needle penetration density, meaning, what does that mean? It means there's too many stitches in one spot. Or it's not necessarily there's too many stitches. There's the risk of it being too many stitches in one spot for the fabric and the design to be able to handle it. So human, go look at it and decide whether it's good or you're right, it's too many and we need to fix it. So that's where we've got to do the sanity check to it and decide. So you want to, the propeller shows you where it is. If I come to project, that element will be highlighted over here wherever it is. So right there, it's that physical element. Yeah, so in the errors themselves, no underlay. That just means that the element has no underlay. Underlay are those running stitches or those stitches that secure your fabric to your stabilizer and give you a nice foundation so that when your top stitching goes in, everything holds still. right? You don't really want to go straight into embroidery without having some sort of underlay. I always amount it to being similar to taking bare drywall and just throwing paint on it. The paint sinks in. Well, if you don't have something on top of the fabric, your thread can end up kind of sinking into the texture of the fabric. So it's different, but it's analogous, right? So no underlay is good for stability, tying your stabilizer and your fabric together, holding it still, making sure you have a layer of thread on top before your top stitching goes on so that it stays proud and doesn't sink in. I believe all these errors are also just described in the manual, so if you pull that up. But like needle penetration density in an area means there's too many stitches in one. There's another area, stitch length over 127 points. That means from where, I'll do it this way, from where one needle penetration is to the next. It should give me that. Let's see. Yeah, right there. Stitch over 127 points, right? That means this stitch length is too long, and it's long stitches. Again, these are just my examples of why long stitches can be risky. Is it a hard pass? Don't do it. I don't like that. But I don't like to say yes, because there are applications, puff hats, for instance. You don't really worry about the pen clip snagging on a puff hat or being laundered and getting caught in the laundry, because it's a hat. They don't get a lot of abrasions to it usually. So a long stitch, if I put it on a shirt or something like that, it's more prone to get snagged. And if it gets snagged, what happens to the embroidery? It gets ruined, right? Because it gets pulled, and now you got this big old loop that pulled, and your customer's mad because their stuff doesn't look good anymore. So long stitches are not ideal because they're more prone to damage from wear and tear, laundering, and things like that. So this says, hey, you got a really long stitch here. Are you sure about that? And I can go, well, no, I really didn't want that. So I can go this was a manual stitch, so I just fixed it manually by adding another stitch, and notice that error went away. Okay, so that's what the 127 point thing is showing you, is that it's just pointing out where you have really long stitches so that you can decide, yes, I'm okay with that, or yikes, I didn't mean to do that. Let me fix it. There's other ones for there's no tie-in and tie-out stitches. Your tie-ins and tie-outs, those are what prevent your embroidery from unraveling, right? The tie-offs are that. Your tie-ins are what tie your top thread to your bottom thread before your machine takes off at full speed, so you want that. So these are just, they're best practices, right, to avoid the errors. I'll tell you, I run designs with errors, but I look at them all and decide, for my application, do I need to make a change? Sometimes the answer is absolutely yes. I messed up. I need to put underlay, or I need to fix that. I didn't mean to have really long stitches, or how on earth did I leave off tie-off knots? I got to fix that. Other times I go, well, I meant for that to be really long because I want the effect. It's going on a hat. Leave it be. So those are the things that it comes to the human side of it, of assessing what makes sense for what you are doing. Okay. So Michael, did that help any? Hopefully. All right. What other questions might you have? Anyone before I call it a day? Awesome. Don't forget, you can always go and click on that question mark, and it will bring up the manual. So, oh, look at that. Design Checker tab 38. Right here, it shows you what all the different things are, right? So these are the errors that it will throw out. So overly long stitches, things that are really wide, 127 points, that's 12.7 millimeters. If you have really tiny stitches, again, that's bad because you're stabbing something in the same hole over and over. You don't have enough tie-in or tie-out stitches. You're sewing on top of something way too many times. Things like that. So you'll see all of these sorts of errors appear. And it's just look at it and decide and think about it. Look at each area and make those decisions. There is a nice video over here, so if you haven't seen it in the manual, anytime you go somewhere, there'll be a link. There's these links over here where there's videos, help files on, or help videos explaining it all. So those are more resources that are really good to check out. Oh goodness, how did that happen? There we go. So keep that in mind as well. Okay. All right. Well, if I don't see any other questions, which I haven't seen any pop in yet, let me quick look. Oh, it looks like in my chat window, the YouTube questions aren't coming up. So I just flipped over to YouTube and see there's questions there. So let me back up a little bit. Good morning, everybody. Looks like John and Stephanie and Sherry, Kyle, thanks for coming. And let's see, Alberto, welcome. Do you have a suggestion for digitizing? I have a complex file that I need digitized. Like where to send it? There's a lot of digitizers out there. I think on Melco's website, under the service site, there is a, oh my goodness, there is a list of digitizers out there. So that might be an option for you. I know that's not a comprehensive list. I think everyone on the face of this planet has an opinion of who's great and who's not, myself included. But it's a good place to start, and the best thing I can say is try people out, see, turnaround, price, quality, see how it stitches out, and go from there. The list on Melco's site has some good ones that you can start with and try those, but it's by no means comprehensive, everyone out there. So yeah, Alberto, so that would be my suggestion there. Kyle, I've been adding alphabets from Alphabet Editor, oh, all right, cool. Sorry, reading out loud. All right, so you've been adding alphabets from the Alphabet Editor, but it's way easy to correct errors by highlighting and fixing and then choosing Save Letter. Yep, I'm glad that's a help. So that, just pointing out, for instance, let's say I just want to show an example of that. I don't know, let's say this font. Pretty hideous font. So let's say this is a font, it's a true type font, and I want to come over here and say wireframe editing, and I want to fix this to be a different shape for this particular letter, or delete some of these extra points. I can come over here and make that change, fix the wireframe for this particular letter. Once I'm happy with it, not that I'm happy with that, I can right click and say Save Letter. And now every time I type that, when it goes to use that letter again, it's fixed, and I don't have to keep on editing it. So for fonts you use a lot, whether they're true type or even if it's a font that's built into the software that you use a lot and you want to change, you can always do that as well. I would say if you're going to change, this is just because I don't like overwriting other people's work. So if you're going to change one of the fonts that are built into the software, I would suggest duplicating it, going into the Alphabet Editor, or just copying and pasting the font and then modifying the one you copied over. So yes, that way you have the baseline in case you need to go backwards in time. Okay, let's see. So Kyle, I'm glad that's helpful for you. Someone said underlays or stitch small fonts. Okay, so I assume the question is, I've got some small fonts, what sort of underlay do I want? So I'm guessing, but hopefully that's what you're asking. So when you have super tiny things, right? Let's go into micro, not slab, micro. So you can see here, like that one. That one goes down to 0.17, so let's make that 0.17, super small, right? And I always add pull offset on it. There we go. So when you got stuff like this, it's really narrow, all right? So you can't do a whole lot underneath it, but you, in my opinion, you still need something, right? because if you just go straight into stitching, you're risking stuff coming undone, stuff moving, things like that. So I always use a center walk. All that is doing, if I turn off the 3D, you'll see it just does a running stitch through there. Now, if the running stitch is hanging out from under it, how do we fix that? And that just means it's really small. You can go into the underlay settings, and instead of having the stitch length at 20, I can make it smaller, right? And that will better approximate the curves around here so that it now is doing more needle penetrations under there. So that is a technique you can use, is decrease that running stitch so that it goes along the curve a little smoother. Okay. But yeah, you can always do that. But for really narrow things, I typically use a center walk personally. Every now and then, if it's really small, I'll manually punch a few stitches. So using this manual punch, what the manual punch does is everywhere you click is a needle penetration. All right. So you got to know what you're doing to some degree on that, because if I do click, 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 all like 3 clicks right next to each other, it's going to try to do 3 stitches on top of each other, which is not a good look. I mean, it doesn't sew very well. So you've got to kind of think about it when you're using the manual punching, but that's a way that you can be very precise about where you want the needle to go. You just tell it exactly, put the stitch right here. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so hopefully that helps with this. But yeah, I always use a center stitch or center walk and then nothing else when it gets really narrow. You also added, when I get files from Digitizers, sometimes stitch out's not great. I don't get DesignShop native files. What is the best process to fix it? Like to change the underlays and densities. So if you're not getting native files, I tell the digitizer what to fix. I send them a picture of what I don't like and tell them to fix it. And the folks that I use, granted, I don't send out a whole lot. I do almost all my own digitizing. The only things I send out are things that are going to take me hours and I don't feel like doing because I got a lot to do. So if it's going to take me hours, it's super complex, I send it out and I pay someone to do it. When I get it back, if it sews or if I look at it and say, hey, it's wrong, I know it's not going to sew well, I just send them where I want fixed and have them correct it. The reason that is, it is way quicker. Like if it's just a density issue with one element, it's way quicker for them, or just like us, right? So this is native. I can come in here, go to top stitching, say, okay, instead of 4, I need that to be 3.8. Done. Save, send. Whereas if it came across as an EXP to me, I'm going to have to play with each element or make adjustments and hope they go in correctly. And it's not an easy process. So I would either get native files or just tell the digitizer. Most of the time they include some amount of back and forth. At least every digitizer I use allows some amount of edits included in the cost. Now, if you, for instance, I send them a design and then I say, whole stop, I want it to be a different design, they're not going to do that for free, right? But hey, this isn't sewing right, they always fix that. So I would just, send a picture, circle the area of concern, ask them to make adjustments of what you're looking to change. That would be my suggestion. Cayetana Nelson has some suggestions on digitizing that does native OFM for Alberto. There's a handful of them, and all of those are folks I've used and I like, so I approve of your list. So there's that. So those were all questions that were put on YouTube. So I'm scrolling YouTube since it's not popping up on my restream for some reason. I'm only getting Facebook questions from the chats, which is obnoxious. But that's okay. I found them over here. What other questions do we have? Oh, Minoir, I apologize if I butchered your name. I'm very sorry. I wish I could find it. I wish I could find a digitizer who uses. Excuse me. I've been getting sick. I wish I could find a digitizer who uses DesignShop so I can get native files. Cayetana Nelson, a few comments above you, actually has a list of 3 that do use native DesignShop. So I've used all of them. There is also on, I will say, non-digitizing is DesignShop. I think all of them, if you tell them you want it native OFM, they all digitize in that. I believe all 3 of those, I'm thinking, all 3 of those do digitize in multiple softwares. So you just tell them you want it in DesignShop native and they can accommodate that request. There are others that do native DesignShop as well. Those are on the Melco service site. So let's see, melco-service.com. Let's find them so I can show you how to find this stuff for later. Digitize. So over here, let's see if that finds it. Come on, search. Digitizing, third-party digitizing companies. Let's see. Yeah, so there's some. Yeah, I haven't used all these, but there's a list up here of some. I've used none. And then JJ, which is one that was put in the comments on YouTube. So, yeah, Non and JJ will do native OFM and requested. Yes, I know that. And then, so will Victor Digitizing. He will as well. Q does native OFM. I assume Rob would. Rob's off. Anyway. Do I have any videos showing digitizing text or business logos? I've watched a few of your videos and they're great. Well, thank you. I try to. So let's see. I've done a lot of random stuff in these DesignShop talks. I haven't done any, probably in 2 or 3 years now, of where I just sit down and record me digitizing and post it. A while back I did digitizing start to finish. There's a video out there that was just kind of talking through the process and kind of going through digitizing something. So I just picked something and digitized it. So there's a few of those. I think I've done a few of those. I think Scott has. Yeah. So there's a few of those videos out there. We can, I mean, if there's an interest in that, I'm happy to, find some logos and digitize them and just record myself walking through them. If there's an interest in that, I guess I can do it on these talks too. Just get a logo ahead of time and go through it. That might be an option. Let us know if that's something you're interested in. That's on the collective, and I don't see a problem with that. I can run it by the applications team and see what they think, but just to make sure. But yeah, Cayetana, he will as well. He has DesignShop, and he's a fantastic guy. So, how do you find Nate, Scott, and Mike's videos? Okay. Okay, so it sounds like there's interest in just watching digitizing. So we did that, like I said, several years ago. We did a few videos because there's interest in it, and then kind of switched to just doing these DesignShop talks and some other videos here and there. But I will bring that back to the team and see what we could do. Yeah, logos have to be more precise. Yeah. Well, and Kyle, that's exactly it. So there's a comment that that would be interesting to see the thought process start to finish. Yeah, so that's, to me, the art of digitizing, and what I find fun about it is looking at a design and looking at art and going, goodness, where do I even start? So, I mean, that's the puzzle part of it, of thinking through how are you going to build it, what makes sense, thinking about, front to back, all the different considerations as you're going. So yeah, I will see what we can do to find some art that I can do. I can't just pick random corporations and start digitizing them though. So I'll have to find fake logos on, the buy some art sites sort of things, and I'll see what we can do. And maybe I'll just see if I can get permission to do 1 or 2 of them during these talks, or if they want me to record them, or if one of them want to do it. I will run that by the team and see what we can do for you. Cool? So there was a question, how do I find the different videos? Oh. All right. I love you dreaming out loud. That's awesome. There's more old videos on small lettering, update to better quality video. Sure. That's fair. So I like the dream out loud. Keep it coming. Okay. Yeah, if you want to. So as far as sending logos, if you want to do that, put them in on the form and with what you're looking for on that Design Shop Talk form, and we'll take a look at them. So that would be awesome. Okay. Before I forget, someone did ask, how do you find videos? There's like 10,000 of them out there. So there's a bunch here. So if you go to the Melco site, there's different playlists. So that's a good start for the basics for the different softwares. And then there's just a lot of content. So my best suggestion would be to kind of scroll through here, and you got a lot of John, and in the training videos you'll see the other folks. So these are fun. Angela. All of these videos down here are all done by some of the other team members. Scott and Nate both recorded a lot of these. Oh, check it out. You can do scaling. So these are all, good resources for you. So there's a ton of content out here. There's Mike. So you got videos on Mike, but that's how I'd find them, is just go look for that. Oh, there's Nate. So Mike, Nate. Anyway, lots of awesome guys that you can learn from out here. Dan. Anyway. But yeah, all right. I see there's quite a bit of interest in doing some projects start to finish, so I will bring that back to the team and see what we can get done. What other questions do you might you guys have? Oh, if you go to the Melco service site, Melco, not that one, Melco-service, that one. Over here, if you click on Design Shop, right there, Design Shop Talk episodes, right? So if you're looking for stuff, these episodes are kind of a free-for-all, right? Because you guys are asking questions, I'm talking about things ahead of time, and then I'm picking it up on the fly, right? So the team back in Colorado does this for me. They keep track of what's discussed. So you can always do a Control F here and puff, or continuous embroidery, right? So you can just look for terms of interest, and you can see it's been talked about 11 times in different texts. So you can go through and see what video, there's links to the videos, and go through and see if any of these are helpful, right? So that's just another way if you're looking for stuff to, goodness, I've been doing these forever. I didn't even realize that. How long have I been doing them? Sorry, let's look. 2019. Hey, check that out. A few years. All right. But anyway, so there's a lot of content out there, both on YouTube and Facebook. But just, you can come to this list, do a Control F, type up here what you're looking for, and it'll show you the different videos where it was discussed on, so that you can go through and look at them and see if those help. And if not, you can type in a question, say, nice try, but try again. I still don't get it. Or, that was close, but I'm doing this. Can you please help? All right. All right, y'all. As always, it's been fun. I will be back next week, hopefully, and see what else, whatever things we can go over. So thanks for joining, and I will be back next week. Until then, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll do this again next time. Bye, everyone.